Well, they have, from your submissions, they are you've made suggestions that, there is some amount of politics in all of this, local politics to it. How would you say that the federal government handles this? Because that comes up very strongly when you listen to the different accounts, that have come out from, even the incident of the kidnapping. We don't really know for sure that there is one story as to how the kidnapping incident took place.
Yes, it's again, I go back to the allegation by Mr. Dokubo Asari regarding the authenticity of the stories of the whole event. I would not go quite as far as that, but the inconsistencies in the stories told by some of the actors in this, like for instance the school principal, and perhaps somehow the blithe way in which she seems to answer some of the questions put to her. I watched on another television station, an online TV station, where she was actually interviewed. I watched a clip of an interview of her, and it struck me that she didn't quite seem concerned enough about the abduction of not one girl, not two girls, 276 girls under her care. She seemed quite blasé about the whole thing. And it wasn't the answers that she gave, it was how she gave them. That's what caught my attention. And perhaps that might be the reason why Mrs. Jonathan broke down on TV.
Well, body language is subject
now infamous.
Not making any excuses for whatever it is you perceived, but you do know that body language is subject to different perceptions and interpretations. The question will be, how does the federal government handle that kind of situation? Because at the end of the day, much as yes, the state government has a share of the responsibility, the bulk stuff is at their table.
And that's why I've always suggested, right from the beginning of this whole episode, before the abduction of the girls, I believe it was on this station about 2 years ago, that I demanded that the federal government should proclaim a full state of emergency in those states, relieve the governors and all elected officials, all political appointees of their positions, and declare full martial law. And that's still my position as of today.
And you think that will help?
I think it will.
But are they playing any role that they are there now?
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're still in charge of the day-to-day administration of their states.
But not security.
And that suggests, I mean, like for instance, I'll give you an example. This abduction that happened against the background of the federal government shutting down all federal secondary schools in the affected areas in the 3 states, Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe. Okay, and also against the background of the West African Examinations Council giving advice to the state governors in the affected states that all candidates for the final year exams be moved to the state capitals for better security. We now know that the Borno state governor apparently wrote back to WAEC and said that, basically giving guarantees about the security of the children in the remote areas, including Chibok, of course, only to provide 4 policemen, 4 solitary policemen against the might of Boko Haram. I think that at best it was a demonstration of extreme poor judgment on the part of the governor. And for that reason, as well as sundry other actions and pronouncements, especially of the governors in those states, they should have been relieved of their positions.
I'm just wondering, I mean,
ages ago.
At the time that the ministry wrote and WAEC saw that there were just about 4, they went ahead with the exams. Couldn't they have just said...
I'm not certain that WAEC would see that there were just about 4 from Lagos. All they were told was that security would be provided. No, and they would have had to go with what the governor said, because of course he's the chief executive officer of the state and the chief security officer of the state.
No, but if WAEC, normally you know how they do, some of them officials can be present to ensure, because it was a security matter. So we expect that they would have taken extraordinary measures, not the regular ones. So the Ministry of Education and perhaps WAEC, at the time that maybe they must have noticed that, okay, well, look, we don't see adequate security here. I'm sorry, we cannot conduct this. Say whatever you want.
Again, WAEC are not local to Chibok. They're not local to Borno State. Yes, they conduct exams there and so on, but I doubt that they have a WAEC office in Chibok.
Yeah, but they raised a concern in the
Yes,
first place. Shouldn't they have followed
There
up?
is a concern in a general sense, not with particular regard to Chibok.
Don't forget, all the schools are closed,
Yes.
apart from this one.
Yes.
And maybe one or two others. So if they had not been moved to the central, it may do great.
Well, if the governor of the state, the chief security of the state, was giving them assurances that everything was covered, then they would have to believe him, wouldn't they?
We'll also have to consider the background against which this was done. We do know that the federal government shut down the schools.
The federal schools?
Yes, especially after what happened.
But Chibok is not a federal school.
Especially after what happened in Buniyadi.
Yes.
In the government.
Yes, exactly.
The
and
federal
that's what brought that about.
Exactly.
In
And
the first
a host of people had to ask us at that time what security was being provided for the schools. The state government did say that their own schools too have been shut down, but because of these exams, they had to take the students back to school. From their own account, they say that Chibok has been relatively safe. As we have also heard, it's a Christian settlement area. It's mostly populated by Christians, and there's really been no attack in that area. Can we really say that, you know, the security apparatus rested solely on the state government, considering that there is a state of emergency in the 3 states, you know, on
Bear
the
in mind
emergency
that
roll?
I've never, for 1 second, sought to blame the governors for operational security issues. I'm talking now about policy. Okay? If the governor, knowing and understanding the trend of Boko Haram attacks from the time they started, and Boko Haram did originate in Borno State. In the days of the late Mohammed Yusuf, what they did was they attacked churches, Christian settlements. Okay, that's what they did.
That's not how we remember it.
That's how I remember it. I do remember that one of the reasons why Mohammed Yusuf was arrested in the first place before his eventual extrajudicial execution was that a church had been attacked and several people had been abducted from the church. Several of them had been beheaded, including a pastor, if I remember correctly, who had refused to convert to Christianity, to convert to Islam under duress. Okay? That's what I remember. So Mohammed Yusuf was eventually arrested, you know, in the midst of all that hoo-ha, and somehow he was executed. Now, the governor, knowing that, and knowing that several churches had been targeted and bombed over the last couple of years, not only in Borno, but also in Bauchi, in Adamawa, you know, even in Abuja, in Niger State, Madala. I don't know if you remember that. Okay, and all these attacks were claimed by Boko Haram. Now, as a governor of such a state, I would not have permitted a school in a Christian settlement to remain open under those circumstances, especially after Buniyadi. I would never have allowed it, because they would definitely be a prime target.
Let me ask you a question.
For attack, especially also as Boko Haram had now developed this tactic of going after remote settlements, Baga, Bama, you know, and of course now Chibok.
Is there a connection between divisive politics, religion, and this insurgency?
Well, clearly there is.
What's the connection?
Clearly there is. I mean, I'm going to mention some names now, and I think certain people will be uncomfortable with that. But I'll start with the former minister of the Federal Capital Territory, Nasir Ahmed El-Rufai. If you look at the trend of his activities on social media, you will realize that every time that there has been an attack, most of the time that there has been an attack by Boko Haram or any terrorist of any sort, his responses would usually be to attack the federal government, usually the person of the president, for being, to put it in his words, clueless as to how to tackle security issues, for being unable to protect the people from attack. Never ever criticizing the attackers for their murderous behavior. Never doing that. Always going after the authorities for not providing protection. It's almost the same thing as saying, you know, the police should have prevented all the armed robberies that happened, or the governors of the states should have prevented all the armed robberies that ever happened in Nigeria, you know, by being more security savvy, as it were. And not acknowledging the fact that, first of all, the act in itself is evil. Therefore, the perpetrators are bad people, and we should all go after them. And this is not the time to point fingers, trade blames, or score cheap political points. And following from the pronouncements of Nasir El-Rufai, you find a number of opposition figures making statements along the same sort of line. Not exactly the same statements, but saying things along the same sort of line. Now, that's one angle to it.